Caroline, with her creativity and imagination, was an enthusiastic participant in make-believe games with her stuffed animals. Her tales of imaginary friends were always very elaborate. Her parents were taken aback when she announced to them one day that she had a twin sister at school. Although they assumed this was yet another one of her made-up stories, they never stopped hearing about Caroline's twin. When Caroline started telling stories about her twin sister on a regular basis, John knew this wasn't the same as her usual imaginary friends. This was clearly something his daughter truly believed in, and he had to figure out what was going on in her life. What if this was something else entirely? He figured it was best for him to go to the source, his daughter's school. He went to his daughter's teacher, but she had unexpected news for him. She told him something about his daughter he had never known before. And when he left school to inform his wife, he saw something that shocked him to his core. John couldn't believe his eyes. There, on school grounds, he saw something that raised even more questions than he already had. Suddenly, he realized that he had to file for divorce. But was Caroline really imagining her twin sister? What did John see on school grounds? And why does he file for divorce? Caroline was a creative and imaginative 9-year-old girl with a flair for storytelling. She loved to play make-believe games with her stuffed animals and would often get lost in her own world of adventures and imaginary friends. Caroline was an only child, and her parents, John and Emily, doted on her, encouraging her storytelling. One day, Caroline came home from school with a sparkle in her eye and an excited tone in her voice. She told John and Emily that she had a twin sister named Clara, who also attended the same school as her. Caroline's mother chuckled and looked at John. He listened attentively to his daughter's stories. According to Caroline, Clara was everything she wasn't: outgoing, daring, and full of mischief. At first, John and Emily found Caroline's stories endearing and played along, assuming it was just another one of her imaginative games. They asked her questions about the girl and told Caroline they wanted to meet her one day. However, when Caroline's stories became more frequent, John began to wonder if she was actually telling the truth. She could talk about Clara in great detail. Every day it was another new story. Never before had Caroline talked so much and so regularly about one of her imaginative friends. So John decided to tell his wife about his worries, but Emily laughed in his face. How could he ever think something like this was real? But John explained, what if there really is a girl in her class that looks a lot like Caroline and she's feeding her these strange stories? She could be a bad influence. Emily shook her head. I'm sure it's just in her head, John. She has always had a strange mind, and she's only 9. This will all fade away soon. John sighed. Emily did have a point. He was there at Caroline's birth, and there was only one baby who came into this world. So John let it alone for a while. That was until Caroline came home with a drawing. There were 2 girls in the drawing, and they were drawn in different styles. John immediately recognized his daughter's drawing style, so he asked who had drawn the other girl, and Caroline's answer shocked him. Clara drew me, and I drew Clara, Caroline happily said. She marched to the fridge and proudly stuck the drawing under a little magnet. Then she headed to her room to play on her own. John was stunned. How can an imaginary friend draw something? He decided he just couldn't let it slide any longer. He walked over to the fridge and ripped the drawing from it. The little magnet fell to the ground and bounced away. John couldn't stand the thought of his little girl possibly being influenced in a bad way, and he was determined to figure out the truth, no matter the consequence. First, he Googled imaginary friends and young children. Maybe there was something else going on and Clara was just a coping mechanism. But Caroline had excellent social skills and could greatly regulate her emotions, so the search led him to a dead end. John had to think of something else. He could ask Caroline a few more questions about Clara, but he didn't want his wife to find out. She had made it clear that she saw no problem with her daughter's imaginary friend, so John had to be very discreet. He walked to Caroline's room and asked if he could play with her dolls. Of course, Caroline was more than happy to play with her father. She looked at him with a big smile on her face and handed him a Barbie. Together they played, while John waited for the perfect moment. He carefully asked his daughter a few more questions about Clara, but she gave nothing away. John felt like his daughter wouldn't be much of a help, so he got up and returned to the living room again. There, he sat down on the couch and ran a few scenarios through his head. It was challenging to do something like this without his wife finding out, but it couldn't be impossible. He eventually decided to go to the source, Caroline's school. He took the afternoon off work and went to Caroline's school during recess. That way, he could look at the children playing outside without causing a scene. He didn't want to embarrass his daughter by randomly walking into her classroom. He disguised himself with a cap and sunglasses and stood across the street next to a bus stop. It looked like he was just waiting for the bus, so no one suspected a thing. He peered through the playground's metal gate and quickly located his daughter playing on the swing. She was laughing and having fun, being pushed by a girl who was a bit taller than her. The girl had long brown hair just like his daughter, but she was clearly older. He couldn't see her face as she was standing with her back toward him, but he was pretty sure she couldn't be Clara. There weren't many other children playing near the swing, just Caroline and the older girl. John couldn't help but smile slightly as he watched his daughter soaring through the air, having so much fun. She seemed very happy and content, not like a girl who had trouble at school with an imaginary friend. He watched for a little while longer, until suddenly, he noticed 3 of the teachers huddling together and pointing in his direction. Shoot, he thought, they're onto me. Luckily, a bus came just in time, and John quickly hopped on. And he was glad he did because they didn't look happy. He looked through the bus's rear window and saw his little girl disappearing in the distance. On the bus ride home, he couldn't stop thinking about the children playing on the playground. He ran the images through his head, trying to recognize unusual behavior, but there wasn't any. What did this mean? The rest of the day, John thought about the playground. He hadn't seen a girl who looked like Caroline's twin, so did that mean she really imagined it? He just wasn't sure, so he decided to email Caroline's teacher. In the email, he asked if his daughter had a friend named Clara in her class who looked a lot like her. All he could do now was wait for the teacher's reply. He closed his laptop and stared ahead of him, thoughts racing through his mind. He had to distract himself for the rest of the day, to not obsess too much over the email. Luckily, the teacher replied that same day. The teacher's answer was loud and clear. There is no girl with the name Clara in my class, and to be truly honest, I've wanted to talk to you or Mrs. Tucker about your daughter's social interactions, so please come by my classroom either tomorrow or the day after when school is over. That doesn't sound good, John thought. When his wife got home that evening, he told her about what he had done. He thought she would be understanding, but she wasn't at all. She actually got mad at John for doing this behind her back and told him to back off. John was stunned. John couldn't believe his wife was acting so lightly about all this. Sure, this could all be in Caroline's head and go away as she grows up, but what if it doesn't? He wouldn't be able to live with himself if this influenced Caroline's life in a bad way, and he had expected the same from his wife. He was disappointed in his wife, as she didn't see the urgency of the situation. So the next day, he went to Caroline's school on his own. He wasn't going to back off that easily. His daughter's well-being meant the most to him, and nothing could stop him from ensuring she was all right. Caroline's teacher was a lovely young lady who had just graduated from college. She happily smiled and welcomed John into her classroom. "I'm glad you could make it, Mr. Tucker." "Please, call me John." "All right, John. I wanted to talk to you about Caroline's social interactions, or the lack thereof." The teacher got straight to the point, which John kind of appreciated. However, he never expected to hear his daughter having no social interaction in the classroom. He had seen her happily playing outside with an older girl just yesterday, so what could be wrong? But the teacher quickly continued. "You see, your daughter has no friends inside this classroom. She's often very quiet and plays by herself. There are a few older children who help her during recess, like pushing her on the swing or playing jump rope with her, but in the classroom, she's often playing by herself in a corner." John's heart sank for his little girl. He knew she could be a little shy or in her own world, but he never thought it would be this bad. He promised the teacher he would talk to his daughter about it as soon as he got home. But on his way out of the school, he suddenly saw something that shocked him. As John said goodbye to the teacher and walked out of the school, he noticed something he never expected to see. It was something very confusing, and he froze in his place. He had to squint his eyes to be 100% sure he was seeing it right, but there was no way around it. There on the playground played a girl that looked just like his daughter. She was a bit taller than her, maybe, but other than that, it was a scary resemblance. He watched the girl from a distance and saw her getting into a car with, presumably, her father. John, consumed by curiousness, ran to his car and followed the pair. He drove close enough not to let the car out of sight, but far enough so the father wouldn't spot him. They drove to the other side of town for about 15 minutes until they arrived at a nice suburban street. The houses looked beautiful, with perfectly cared-for lawns and flower beds in bloom. There were shiny cars in every driveway, and some even had two. The people who lived here clearly had enough money to take good care of themselves. Then the car, with the girl and father inside, pulled into a driveway. John parked his car a little further down the road to make himself seem less suspicious. He could see their house through his side mirrors, and as he wore glasses, no one could see he was spying on them. He pulled out an old newspaper and pretended to read it to sell it a little more. Now, no one would suspect him of anything, or so he hoped. As he observed the house, John couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. It was a beautiful home with a perfectly mowed lawn and large front windows. He wondered what it would be like to live there with his wife and daughter. But his thoughts were interrupted as the father and daughter stepped out of the car. He could now see the girl's face clearly in the sunlight. It was almost as if he was looking at his own daughter. They had the same facial structure, and the only thing they didn't have in common was their height and eye color. His daughter had blue eyes, and the girl's eyes were brown. John now knew for sure this had to be the girl Caroline kept talking about, and this was probably the same girl he saw at recess pushing his daughter on the swing. His heart raced in his chest as he realized he was actually onto something, and his daughter hadn't been lying to him. After the girl and her father went inside, John waited a bit longer in his car. He had a feeling something was about to happen. Then, after a few hours, he suddenly got a text from his wife. She asked where he was, as she had to leave soon for a girls' dinner, which John had forgotten about. John had lost track of time and only snapped back to reality after his wife's text. There was no way he was going to leave his post now that he finally felt like he was getting somewhere with his investigation. He had to come up with an excuse to stall for some time. He texted his wife that he was working late and asked if she could find a babysitter. He felt horrible to put this on his wife on such short notice, but he wasn't ready to leave yet. Emily wasn't happy with John's absence, but was lucky enough to get their neighbor's teenage daughter to babysit. She had watched Caroline before, so John and Emily were confident she would be capable of watching her again. John promised his wife he would be home soon, so their babysitter wouldn't have to stay long. But deep down, John knew he wasn't sure about that at all. This could easily take a long time. John sighed. This better be worth my time, he thought. He continued to wait outside the house, observing any activity, and occasionally texted his wife about how her evening was going. She told him all was good, but that she lost her car's key and would sleep at her friend's place. This confused John. Why didn't she just ask him to come pick her up? But just as he wanted to call her, something outside of the house changed. The father opened the blinds, and he and his daughter sat in front of the window, looking at the street. Why would they do that? They were looking at the street and everything surrounding it. The girl pointed in various directions while chatting with her father. John felt a bit uncomfortable by this sudden change, but he talked himself out of it. They couldn't have spotted him, as he was inside his car looking the other way. Or could they? Suddenly, John wondered if they had seen him. But if they did, why stay inside? They were happily chatting to each other as they sat by the window, and John began to wonder if they could be waiting for someone to come home. He hadn't seen the little girl's mother yet, so that could be it. John got lost in his own thoughts again as he stared at the pair on the windowsill. He imagined what they were talking about and couldn't seem to stop focusing on the scary resemblance the girl had with his own little girl. It was just too uncanny to be a coincidence. After a while, he saw the girl and her father leave the house again, but this time they sat on the curb in front of the house. The sun was setting, and John could hear his stomach rumble. He hadn't eaten a thing as he was so focused on this girl. There was no way he would leave now to get some food, and ordering to his car would be too noticeable. He tried ignoring his hunger, but the rumbling only got worse. He found it hard to keep his mind on the girl and knew he had to eat something in order to focus again. He looked through his car and found a chocolate bar. This'll do for now, he thought. The girl was playing on her scooter as the father sat on the curb, watching her and cheering her on. It made John miss his little girl, and he suddenly realized how crazy he was acting. Suddenly, John doubted his actions. Was this really a good idea? And what was he hoping to get out of this? He realized how stupid he had been acting and how he never thought ahead, but only in the moment. He decided to head home to his girl and kiss her goodnight. He started his car, ready to drive home, when suddenly the girl dropped her scooter and jumped up and down in the air. John saw 2 headlights coming their way and figured it was probably the mom arriving home. At first, he didn't want to give it too much attention, but then he noticed something. He had seen that car before. In fact, that was the same car his wife had. And then he looked at the number plate. John couldn't believe his eyes. Was he seeing this correctly? Not only was it the same car, but it also had the same number plate. What was his wife doing here? This was too much to wrap his head around. He watched in shock as his wife stepped out of the car and hugged the little girl tightly. She walked over to the man and kissed him on the cheek. John's heart sank as he realized his wife had been lying to him all this time. John didn't know what to do. He sat in his car, staring at his wife, happily chatting with another man while a little girl hugged her legs. His life flashed before his eyes as he tried to make sense of this all, but he couldn't. Never in a million years had he expected this to be the outcome of his investigation. He couldn't believe his wife would do something like this, and how was it even possible? He knew for a fact that Caroline wasn't a twin. He saw the birth himself. There was only one way for him to figure out the truth. He had to confront his wife, and he couldn't wait a second. Even before the father, Emily, and the girl had gotten inside the house, John angrily stepped out of his car and slammed the door behind him. The family heard the loud bang of the car door and looked in John's direction. He could see the expression on his wife's face change instantly. John walked toward the trio, and the father quickly told the girl to get inside. He could see how confused everyone was, but that wasn't the only expression on his wife's face. No, he could see how guilty she was as she realized it was over. She had been caught in the act. "John," she confusedly asked, "what are you doing?" She could hardly believe her eyes. "I could ask you the same question, Emily," he angrily replied. The other man, who could sense the tension between them, stepped in front of Emily. "Who are you?" he calmly asked, not wanting to start a fight. "I'm her husband. Who are you?" The man frowned and looked at Emily. He clearly had no idea what was going on. "Oh, you didn't know?" John said. "Let me explain. Emily has been my wife for about 15 years. We even have a little girl, just like you, who's 9. She had been talking about a little girl named Clara." John continued. "I'm guessing your daughter's name is Clara?" John asked the man. The man slowly nodded, still letting everything sink in. "Has your daughter ever talked about a girl named Caroline from her school?" John asked again. He could see the man piecing everything together, and then he turned to Emily. "Please explain, Emily. Is he telling the truth?" Emily, who had tears streaming down her face, didn't know what to say. She looked at the man and reached for his hand, but he pulled away. He could read the guilt off her face and knew John was telling the truth. Apparently, the man named Tom and Emily had been together for 20 years. They had a daughter who was indeed older than Caroline. Tom had arranged for Clara to transfer to the same school as Caroline without Emily's knowledge. He wanted his daughter to be close to him, and the other school was almost an hour away. Emily could spend so much time with John and Caroline because she had told Tom she worked a remote job. She had told John the same, but now they realized that she actually went to the other family every time she went on a work trip. They were truly heartbroken. Emily had desperately tried to transfer Clara again, but she had made a lot of friends and didn't want to move. Deep down, Emily had known the truth would come out eventually, and it had happened sooner rather than later now that her daughters attended the same school. There was no way around it anymore. John returned home and hugged his little girl, who was asleep in her bed. He felt torn on what to do, as he didn't want his daughter to grow up without a mom. But right now, he felt so betrayed by Emily, he couldn't even think about speaking to her on short notice. Tom and John eventually both divorced Emily, and both got custody of their girls. They stayed in contact, and the girls formed an amazing bond with each other. Emily got the girls on the weekends and felt horrible about what she had done. Because of that, she never remarried.